My name is Sophia. This happened in 2023 in a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. 8 months after giving birth to our first daughter, my husband and I decided to move into a bigger house so our child would have more space to play. The neighborhood was clean, full of trees, and the neighbors seemed friendly. The house to our right was occupied by a man around 40 years old named Carl. He lived alone. He was tall and skinny, and always wore dark t-shirts. When we went over to introduce ourselves, Carl smiled politely and clearly said, "I live alone. No wife or kids. Don't worry. I like it very quiet." At first, everything seemed normal. Carl didn't interact much, but he wasn't a bother. Until one night, about 3 weeks after we moved in. At around 1:37 a.m., while I was breastfeeding my daughter, I heard a child crying from the house next door. The cry was loud and real. It wasn't the normal cry of a baby. It was a painful, terrified scream, as if a child was being hurt. My husband and I looked at each other. He whispered, "Do they have a kid next door?" The next morning, I saw Carl in the yard and asked him about it. He laughed and shook his head. "Oh, you must have misheard. I watch horror movies loud at night. It was probably screaming from the movie." I nodded, but I still felt uneasy. From then on, the crying became an almost nightly occurrence, especially between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. Some nights the crying would last over 20 minutes, sometimes screaming, sometimes sobbing, sometimes sounding like it was being muffled. We couldn't sleep. Even our daughter would wake up crying because of it. One night in November, the crying was louder and more desperate than ever. The child sounded hoarse, like they were begging for help. I couldn't take it anymore and called the police. When 2 officers arrived, Carl opened the door normally and even smiled politely. But when the police asked to search the house, his attitude changed instantly. He became aggressive and refused. Eventually, they found a completely soundproofed room in the basement. Inside was a metal crib, handcuffs, leg shackles, and dried bloodstains all over the floor. In the corner of the room, they found a 4-year-old girl curled up, extremely thin, and covered in old and new injuries. Carl was arrested on the spot for child abduction and torture. The little girl's name was Lily. She had been kidnapped by Carl 7 months earlier. He had kept her locked up and tortured her the entire time. Even though we moved away long ago, every time my daughter cries at night, I still can't forget the sound of that child crying from Carl's house. I often wonder, if I hadn't called the police that night, how much longer would that crying have continued? My name is Ethan. This happened in 2021 in a quiet suburb in Illinois. My wife Sarah and I had just bought our first home after getting married. It was a 2-story light gray house on a peaceful street. Directly across from us lived a middle-aged woman named Linda. Linda lived alone. She was around 50 years old, rarely spoke, and almost never left her house during the day. We only saw her occasionally standing behind her window, staring at the street. When we first moved in, we went over to introduce ourselves, but Linda just nodded slightly and closed the door. We assumed she was just very introverted. Starting from the second week after we moved in, the gifts began appearing. Every morning when we woke up, there would be a carefully wrapped gift at our front door. Sometimes it was warm homemade cookies, sometimes fresh flowers, sometimes a fragrant loaf of bread. At first, we were delighted and surprised. But soon the gifts became strange. One morning, there was a small pretty box at the door. Inside was a photo of our family taken at a park 2 weeks earlier. The terrifying part was that we had never printed that photo. Sarah panicked because she had only saved it on her phone. In the following days, the gifts became increasingly disturbing. One time it was a small doll that looked exactly like our 2-year-old daughter. The doll was wearing the exact same outfit our daughter usually wore. Another time, it was a jar of honey with a handwritten note to help strengthen your daughter's health. We had never told Linda that our daughter got sick often. I installed a doorbell camera. On the 47th night since we moved in, I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard a faint noise outside the door. I opened my phone to check the live camera feed. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Linda was standing right at our front door. She was wearing a long black robe, her hair neatly tied up. She leaned forward and whispered something I couldn't make out. Then she placed something on the doorstep and stood completely still, staring directly into the camera for nearly a full minute, as if she knew I was watching. I waited until morning to open the door. On the doorstep was a small glass jar. Inside was a thick, dark red liquid. At the bottom of the jar was a rolled-up piece of paper. The note, written in shaky handwriting, said, "This is my brother's blood. He used to live in this house too." Sarah cried when she read it. We called the police immediately. The police came, took the jar, and recorded our statements. 2 days later, a young female officer came to our house and said in a serious tone, "Mr. Ethan, this house previously belonged to Linda's brother. His name was Daniel. He died 9 years ago. It turned out that over the past 9 years, Linda had driven away more than 7 families who moved into this house." The climax came the night before we moved out. The camera recorded Linda standing at our door at 3:14 a.m. This time she didn't leave a gift. She just stood there, staring directly into the camera, and spoke loud enough for the microphone to catch. "You are not allowed to leave. Daniel needs company." Her voice no longer sounded like that of a middle-aged woman. It was hoarse and trembling, as if 2 people were speaking through the same mouth. We moved out in a single night without telling anyone. To this day, whenever I wake up in the middle of the night, I still check the old camera footage. Even though we've moved over 800 miles away, I still can't bring myself to delete all the files. My name is Brandon. This happened in 2024, in a quiet suburb in Southern California. My wife Megan and I had been married for just over a year when we bought our first house. It was a cute 2-story home with a cherry blossom tree in the front yard and a big backyard perfect for gatherings. We thought we had finally achieved the life everyone dreams of. Our neighbor to the right was a woman around 45 years old named Linda. She lived alone. When we first moved in, Linda was very friendly. She brought over homemade cookies to welcome us and spoke very politely. Megan even said she seemed nice. But after just 3 weeks, strange things started happening. The first time I realized something was wrong was one afternoon when I came home early. As soon as my car stopped in the driveway, I saw Linda standing in her yard, waving with a big smile and saying, "You're home early today, Brandon." I was a bit startled because we had never told her my name, but I assumed Megan had mentioned it. I nodded and went inside. That night, I told Megan. She was surprised because she had never mentioned my name to Linda. From then on, things got increasingly weird. Linda started calling me Brandon naturally, as if we had known each other for years. She would often stand by the fence waiting for me to come home from work. Every time she saw me, she would ask about my health, what I was having for dinner, and even how Megan was feeling. Then she started changing her appearance. Megan is about 5 feet 5 inches with long light brown hair and often wears simple dresses and denim jackets. Within a month, Linda cut her hair to the exact same length and dyed it the same color. She began wearing identical clothes to my wife, same colors, same styles. She even started using the exact same perfume Megan wears. I started getting chills down my spine. Some afternoons when I came home, from a distance I would see a woman dressed exactly like Megan waving at me from the next yard. My heart would race thinking it was my wife. But as I got closer, I realized it was Linda. She would stand there smiling at me with a strange look in her eyes. One time, Megan was hanging laundry in the backyard. Linda immediately came out too. They stood just a fence apart. Linda looked Megan up and down with pure hatred in her eyes. Megan later told me Linda looked at her like she wanted to kill her. We started to feel scared. I installed cameras on the porch and in the backyard. Within just 2 weeks, the cameras caught Linda standing behind the fence watching our house more than 40 times, especially when Megan was home alone. The climax happened one evening in June. I came home late from work. As I turned into our street, I saw Linda standing at our front door wearing the exact same dress Megan wore most often. She was knocking on our door. When Megan opened the door, Linda smiled sweetly and said, "You're home late. Brandon, I've already prepared dinner. Come inside and eat." Megan froze. Linda was calling me by name and speaking to Megan as if she were the stranger. And Linda was my wife. Megan slammed the door shut. Linda stood there for a long time, her face expressionless, staring blankly at the door. That night, we decided to call the police. The police took our statements. But just 2 days later, we received shocking news. Linda was arrested for possessing over 300 photos and videos of Megan. She had printed them and covered an entire room in her house with them. She called it Megan's room. They also found a notebook with extremely detailed notes about Megan's daily routine: what time she woke up, when she showered, what clothes she wore, even her menstrual cycle. As she was being led to the police car, Linda looked straight at Megan and me, smiled, and whispered, "I'll come back to you, Brandon." We sold the house within a week, even though we moved out over 6 months ago. Every time we hear a knock at the door or footsteps in the yard, we both still jump. And the scariest part is, she had planned everything so meticulously.